Shalom all, Ariel Tzadok here from the KosherTorah School, KosherTorah.com, bringing you another lesson in our series here, which I've entitled The Secrets of Genesis. This is now the fourth lesson that we're discussing our topic. So, from the beginning, let me do a quick little review with some of the ideas and concepts that we're laying down here so that we can continue to discuss what our topic is going to be now, which, my goodness, in a short amount of minutes that we have, I'm going to try to cover the topic of the Garden of Eden, the original purpose of Adam Rishon, the trees, the Tzadok, that's a knowledge, the tree of knowledge, the tree of life. What really happened with this Nahash, serpent guy, and this so-called fall? Right, that's a lot of stuff to talk about, but something we got to try to set the record straight. So again, just to lay down a foundation here. Number one, as we've discussed in our previous classes, you cannot take anything that is discussed in the creation story, as we say, kepshuto, literally. This is a big difference, of course, with the historical Torah or Judaic understanding of Genesis, and for example, that of modern-day fundamentalist Christians, especially in the United States. You, of course, have heard those who thump their fists with vigor saying the Bible and every word of it is absolutely literally true. Well, that is just never been the case. Anyone who reads the Bible, even at the most superficial levels, knows and recognizes that to be the case. I mean, fundamental concepts of knowledge will show us this. But people usually don't like to think for themselves. They usually don't like to research for themselves, and they certainly tend to have some type of an emotional inability to even contemplate, certainly not to embrace ideas which contradict that which they want to believe or choose to embrace. So whenever it comes to realms of scholarship, you find that scholars are usually challenged not so much by intellectual honesty or intellectual concepts as much as emotional prejudice. People really, I suppose some movie where they said, you don't want to know the truth. You can't handle the truth. That's one of the major unfortunate episodes whenever it comes, especially to biblical scholarship. People come to read our Jewish Bible outside of any context of its authenticity, outside of any context of its originality, and insist that their translation interpretation is the absolute only way to understand things. And, well, what can I say? I mean, that's just historically never been the case. Now, I'm using that word historically because we have on record biblical commentaries, if you will, that have been written since before the days of the destruction of the Second Temple. Many of you might have heard of the famous Jewish philosopher of Alexandria, Egypt, named Philo. Well, his books are readily available today, even in English translation. And whether or not you will ascribe to him as an authentic or authoritative biblical commentator, that's a matter of opinion. But what you find is that even Philo was clearly understanding Genesis in a non-literal way, as was all the rabbis of the day, as was all of the mystical masters of the day. I don't think that we have an original Notzri Nazarene from the school of Yeshu commentary of Genesis available, but judging from everything that we know about Yeshu historically, his teachings are clearly Pharisaic as well as somewhat Essenic, some would say. And judging from Pharisaic and Essenic teachings on Genesis, which we do have, none of these schools ever looked at these things literally. So therefore, when we come to understand the Garden of Eden, when we discussed the Garden of Eden in our previous class, if you remember, we discussed and revealed from ancient Midrash that the Garden of Eden is actually considered to be a physical location, and it is supposed to be in inner earth. Now, there's actually a very interesting teaching that you'll find in the Zohar and elsewhere, that the entranceways to the Garden of Eden and supposedly Gehinnom, allegedly, again, according to legend, a physical place, are both guarded in the north and the south by layers and layers of deep ice and snow. You can see what she whiz. The Garden of Eden is blocked by deep layers of ice and snow. And for those of you who are again aware that we believe the Garden of Eden is in inner earth, and there are many people in the inner earth community today who will claim that we have giant holes at the north and south poles, where in which inner earth is accessed. Now, in all due respect, I have never personally been to the North or the South Pole. Santa Claus has never really invited me up there to the North Pole, so never met Rudolph or anybody of the kind. And yes, of course, I'm being facetious. Does that mean that there is not or is big holes at the poles? I don't know. Just because I haven't seen them doesn't mean that they are not there, or just because I may believe that they are there doesn't mean that they truly are. That is what some who claim, and so let it be. I just found that interesting Zohar teaching corresponding to the idea, may offer some suggestion of that idea being ancient and well-er, I can say that? No. But anyway, getting to the point. The issue is not so much whether or not where or which Gan Eden is, but what actually is its nature. Now, in later Midrashic teachings, later Kabbalistic teachings, Gan Eden is always used as a reference to, if you will, the afterlife. So when a person's soul dies, they go to the Garden of Eden. But a point that's made very clear by the sages is that there is what's called an upper Garden of Eden and a lower Garden of Eden. And the lower Garden of Eden is supposedly this home of Adam, and it is described to us Kabbalistically as taking the form and structure that the individual mind would endeavor or tend to experience as its own personal concept of the afterlife. So this is a very interesting concept here, because we say that when the soul leaves the body, it goes into a parallel reality of mental construct, not too dissimilar from this world. So essentially, in that state of mind, out of body, mind you, because the body's past, the individual will therefore experience, in quote, the afterlife within the cultural context of one's own personal background. So therefore, when a Jewish individual dies, let's, for example, say a religious Jewish individual, they might experience Gan Eden as being the place of the gathering of the sages. And they might have encounters with their understanding of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Eliyahu Navi, Mashiach, Moshe Rabbeinu, etc. Where in which if a Catholic were to pass away and die, you might find them going to their version of heaven, where Saint Peter is guarding the gates and the Virgin Mary is waiting to meet them, etc. Or if they were fundamentalist Christian, they might find, as they go into the Garden of Eden, their version, of course, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus walking around like in hippie robes and sandals, followed by a whole bunch of little sheep. And to each their own. And of course, our brothers from the religion of Islam would see things within the context of their cultural environment. This is what we call the lower Garden of Eden. It is experienced for a certain time, where in which then the soul then evolves to a point to recognize, if you will, the superficiality of that experience. If the soul is able to evolve, then it is said to go to the upper Garden of Eden, which is a higher state, phase of existence, or to recycle, reincarnate, and to come back to earth. That's how we understand it. But now, within this definition of the Garden of Eden, we have to go back to our biblical story, because a point that's made very clear is that the original Gan Eden, while we say it's an, in quote, physical place, doesn't necessarily mean that it's physical within the context and parameters of our understanding of physical locality. So therefore, let's for argument's sake say that we found the Garden of Eden. Well, okay, let's just, for argument's sake, say there's a big wall around it. Okay, we get through the wall, right? We take a nice modern tank and we blow a hole through the wall, or we knock on whatever door is there and we go in, whatever. Are we going to be dealing with an actual physical location? Or is it something else? Based upon our understandings of Midrash, we have to conclude the latter, that it is something else, meaning that it very well might be a alternate dimensional reality within the context of our physical existence. Now, what this means is something important. If we want to discuss the whole concept of inner Earth, like we did in our previous class, okay, if we were able to take the entire planet and slice it in half like we would a piece of fruit or an onion or something like that, would we find inner Earth therein? Those who understand the concept of inner Earth literally would adamantly say yes. Well, in all due respect, I've never sliced open the earth to look. But it is very possible that our understandings of these things might be in an alternate or a parallel reality of our own earth. Now, if that is the case, then we'd be sliding through vortexes into parallel worlds. For those who travel in the spiritual planes and the mental planes, we're very well aware of the existence of these parallel realities. So, is the Garden of Eden in this parallel reality? And therefore, from our physical point of view, something a little bit different than what we would expect. We believe that the answers to that, of course, are affirmative, and that is the case. So therefore, the Garden of Eden is the domain of the dwelling of souls. And yet it appears to those souls as something physical. Now, with all this being described as our relative, modern, if you will, experience of the garden, let's go back to Adam and Eve. Well, a point that's made very clearly, especially in the Kabbalah, is that when we speak of Adam and Eve, we were not necessarily speaking about actual physical individuals, as is so commonly understood and embraced in, of course, fundamentalist religion. So Adam was actually considered the collective soul of all humanity. That means Adam was not necessarily an individual, but a composite of all individuals. Now, for those who want to reconcile what we can call pshat and sod, with literal with the in quote spiritual, you might say, well, we're still a physical person because Adam Harishon, that's what we refer to Adam as the first man, was an actual person. And if I went into the afterlife, into Garden of Eden or whatever, I'd be able to bump into him. Gee, I'd recognize him right away because he's the one without a belly button. Go figure that out if you don't already know what it means. Okay? Created by God, not born of a mother, so didn't have an umbilical cord. Okay. Well, that might not be exactly true. We understand Adam Harishon, the first man, and Chava, his wife, to be very different in the reality of things than was originally understood as being an actual male and female Homo sapien human being. So in this respect, this is how the Kabbalistic teachings understand it. That originally there was an entity formed of this earth, but of a higher, more pure, if you will, energetic vibration than that of the present physical Homo sapien species. And it was into this higher energetic form that a being, for lack of a better word, from a higher dimensional plane actually came and inhabited that which we today call the astral body, or the Halukah Darabanan body of light. And this is actually hinted to right in the biblical stories when we understand the original Hebrew words of things. So, for example, when Adam was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and it is said that God gave them, bigdei or, garments of or, skins, it is understood that that was actually the physical body of Homo sapien flesh in which we exist right now. So what was this original status? Well, even Rabbi Yehuda Fatia, again in his book Minchat Yehuda, states that this Adam HaRishon actually had, quote, spiritual parents, like a mom and a dad, in the Bariatic realm. The Bariatic realm, as we know, is a higher plane outside of space and time as we understand it, in that realm which we can call the dimension of mind. So the Adamic species is a representation of and an expression of the domain of collective thought. Now this, of course, echoes words that was later discovered by, of course, Carl Jung, a famous founder of analytical psychology, who speaks about there being a collective unconscious that binds all humanity. Why unconscious? Because we're not aware of it. But at some level, that unconscious, from our point of view, is conscious unto itself. And that collective consciousness is what we call the collective soul of Adam. Others, in other traditions, might refer to it as the Akashic records, where in which all mind, all thought, past, present, future, are all united as one. So in this respect, it was that which materialized an expression here on earth. Now think about this concept. This is very important. When we speak about angels, we always speak about angels coming down from heaven. Big argument in Kabbalistic traditions, are angels actually physical, or do they only exist within vision? Now, rather than sit and debate what you might think is a diversion of views, recognize this. Those entities from whatever other races that exist, from whatever dimensional planes that they exist, whenever they come to our earth, how would they best or easily, most easily materialize? Let's say, for example, you are a representative from God, for lack of a better word. That's what the Hebrew word malach, angel, means. You're a messenger. How would you get here? Well, you might hop a ride on some type of flying saucer that you might find have crashed at Roswell and the like, and come on down, right? Just land in your good old flying saucer. Some people, of course, my peer from the Ancient Alien program, Eric von Daniken, he's absolutely convinced that Ezekiel's chariot was some kind of a flying saucer. Well, again, in all due respect to my peer, his understanding of the Hebraic language of Hebrew is severely lacking in that respect. And of course, Ezekiel's chariot was a, in quote, vision of the like of which I would describe it right now. You see, when these entities, which in our dimensional plane are essentially only energy, well, how do you communicate physicality with energy? Remember, in our understanding, everything is alive, everything is conscious, everything is sentient, aware of themselves and aware of God. So if you have one of these energetic entities and they wish to communicate with you or I here in this physical body, they communicate mind to mind. And the human mind therefore takes on whatever form or structure that energetic body will, or I should say, how that energetic body of that entity is going to be perceived within the human mind. This goes right back to what we discussed earlier about the afterlife, how it is perceived in the human mind. All of our mental constructs, this is what we call in the Kabbalah, the klipot, the husks, the shells. So therefore, you'll find today very, very common. People hold all kinds of superstitious fears and irrational beliefs about what the spirit world, the spirituality is all about. People run away from it in absolute emotional terror, fear, because of what their mental constructs have led them to believe. We must overcome the limitations of these mental constructs in order to ever experience the truth. So the Garden of Eden is understood by us as existing in a higher vibrational plane. And into this higher vibrational plane, an higher form of physicality exists. We might call it the higher realms of the Asiatic world. And into this higher Adamic form, remember it says Adam was created from the dust of the earth. Well, doesn't mean he was physical yet. It's still considered to be symbolic of a body of light. And as such, the Adamic consciousness, what we can call descended from, in quote, from wherever it's actually God breathed into this form, the breath of life. So essentially, we know that which we call Adamic or human consciousness comes from God. Now, this is echoed in the words of the Zohar, Pashat Ekev, where in which it says, Kuchaberechu, God, Originated Torah, which is the universal way, and Israel, which is the highest realm of or expression of the Adamic souls, all one and the same. Because essentially, that which we call souls, we call it a spark from God. And all souls, like it says in Genesis there, chapter 1, all souls, Jewish, Gentile, everyone, all created by God in the divine image. So in that concept of singularity and unity, all souls, yours, mine, and everyone else, were included in this structure, king to earth. Well, what did we come to earth for? We came for vacation? Well, what's going on? Why did God bring us to earth? Well, the Bible says to, in quote, till the garden. Well, we were born to be what? Gardeners? Really? Is that what we came down here to be? So we have like the heavenly lawnmower? And that's what we did. We mowed lawns and pruned bushes. Gee, that doesn't really sound like a very fulfilling life to me. Well, what's it all about? Again, when we understand that these things are not literal, we recognize that there was a need. Remember way back in Genesis 1:1, we discussed in our first class, Genesis 1:2, we said there was something missing in creation, that we had this tohu vabohu. Well, the pinnacle of this act of building was the introduction of the Adamic souls, to work which that had already been, if you will, harmed, fallen, or broken. So we are under the understanding that there were generations and generations, for God knows how long, of pre-Adamic Homo sapien human beings who not only walked the face of this earth, but built very advanced and technologically sophisticated and intellectually and spiritually complicated societies. Again, is this ancient Atlantis as such? Some might say so, whatever. But somehow that great civilization collapsed. It is believed that many of them ascended to the stars, and that they are the very much same sons of God referred to later in Genesis 6, who came down to take the daughters of men. Human beings, Homo sapien, who indeed did not have Adamic souls. But at that level, at that time, you wouldn't necessarily know, because Adamic soul means a level of consciousness that embodied a physical form. So the original Adamic souls were in bodies of light. And then we had this episode called the fall. Now, unlike in the Christian tradition that believed that this, in quote, fall separated all human souls from God and therefore needs redemption and the like, or there's eternal damnation, and you will find that those concepts certainly do not exist in the Jewish Bible. There has never been an eternal separation. There has never been any concept of any eternal damnation. The threats and fears and emotional manipulation, specifically in Christianity, of there being an eternal damnation, eternal hellfire, had absolutely no foundation and no meaning within a Jewish context. So therefore, if and when a certain type of Christian might say to a Jew, "You're going to burn in hell forever for your disavowal of our religion," it makes no sense. There's nothing there whatsoever that has any kind of a theological or biblical-based reality to it. For us, that's nothing more than just like a child's story. We're much more concerned about living a righteous life and serving God and obeying the divine will than worrying about some sense of damnation in an afterlife based upon some theological inconsistencies. Just doesn't, it's just the way of it. So the Adamic souls came to rectify the fallen earlier human civilization. They were the ones already as physical Homo sapien humans. It is believed and taught by many that the creation of man's story in Genesis 1 and the creation story of man in Genesis 2 speak of completely different creations. One being of the original human race, and only later the introduction of the Adamic souls. You can argue back to this back and forth, but if you go research this among certain Jewish commentaries, you'll find that that's what's there. So, under that understanding, the Adamic souls came down to earth to rectify that which had happened before. And according to our midrashim, our legends, this erupted into a very big, in quote, discussion in that place wherever it is called heaven. Now remember, heaven must be some actual place. Very possible a planet somewhere in our solar system and or universe. And you can say, well, really? Is that what it is? Gee, that sounds like something Mormon and the like Planet Kolob and the rest. Well, I don't know. Again, my intergalactic travels at this time are severely limited, so I can't really tell you what's out there other than in my imagination or astral travels. But if and when there is this planetary association with, in quote, heaven, well, that doesn't mean that it's in this actual physical dimensional reality. It could be in a very parallel dimension. So I always ask people who claim that they, in quote, go to heaven. And I said, tell me, look up. Do you see a sky? Look down. Do you see a ground? If you keep walking, does the plane of heaven actually like go around in a circle like our planet does? Sorry, flat earthers, you're not, biblically valid in that respect. But I ask people to elaborate, and you'll find that most experiences of the, in quote, afterlife or of heaven is usually much imaginative as opposed to actual. Indeed, whenever we speak of hechalot or ascendant, Enoch and the like, they will reveal to us many, many a thing. But you have to ascertain that this is all a mental faculty ascent as opposed to an actual physicality ascent. Many people want to believe that when they ascend, they're going up in like a flying saucer and the like. Again, in reference to many of my peers back on the Ancient Aliens program. You believe whatever you want. But upon examination of all of these types of experiences, Kabbalistic ascent, Eastern Oriental ascent, much like shamanistic ascent, Sufi ascent, seem to be pretty much the equal psychological parameter of what we would call an astral ascent as opposed to a physical one. So again, when these Adamic souls came to earth, there erupted this big argument amongst these other entities saying, why are these other higher dimensional plane beings coming down into the physical dimension to repair? These other entities felt that it was their job to do so. Now, this is the foundation of the Christian concept of the, in quote, war of Satan, in which he rebelled against God and brought down a third of heaven with him. Well, again, this is a myth in the Jewish context, never to be taken literally. We don't believe that there was ever, in quote, a war in heaven. We don't believe that there was any entities ever kicked out of heaven, and which then established its own domain, like the anti-God society. No, this is all a mythology based upon midrashic teaching. Now, remember what midrashic teachings are. They're legends, they're stories. They are embellished tales with the specific intent to tell moralistic stories, never history. When these stories were in original Jewish hands, they were understood symbolically. But when they fell into the hands of those who are not Jewish, who then understood them to be literal, reading poetry as prose, this then became the foundation of much of Catholic and later Christian theology. That's really where the major divisions come from. It is what it is. There's not much we're going to be able to do about it now other than just explain the history of the development of these ideas and concepts. But getting again back to the garden, there were these entities. We can call them the angels, some, whatever race of angels that have been, felt that they could have better handled this repair job than these outside higher dimensional plane souls. And they endeavored to do so. And that, of course, later we read about the, in quote, malachim came down to earth. Again, those previous Adamic souls, the ones who ascended to the stars, they were the ones who wanted to fix their own world. No, they weren't minions of Satan. They weren't demons or anything of the kind. They were humans. Biologically, probably not too dissimilar, if indistinguishable from us today, because we inhabit their form. Our physical bodies are not essentially Adamic. They're human, but our souls are, in quote, Adamic, from a higher domain. That is why we have such a division within ourselves between that which we call a Yetzer HaTov and a Yetzer Hara. We are essentially symbiotic entities in which we have a higher dimensional presence, consciousness, in a lower dimensional vibrational frequency body. And that, of course, explains, if you will, what we would today call the war between good and evil within ourselves. This is what happened in Gan Eden, the original Gan Eden. Entities of that original world wanted to repair this world for themselves. And one of them is referred to as the Nachash, the serpent. Now, remember from the good old story in the Bible, the serpent is talking with, in quote, Eve. I said in quote because there's no physical gal there. So stop thinking of some nice little hot, 18, 19-year-old naked babe running around in the garden having a conversation with a snake. Have you any of you ever really spoke with a snake? The Bible makes it very clear. Legend says that the snake stood upright. It was humanoid in appearance, and obviously it spoke. So it's a very intelligent humanoid. A reptilian. Ooh. Maybe. But that's not the context of the identification, because the word Nahash is based on the root minahesh, which means like a sorcerer or an enchanter. It is believed and understood, again, that Adam and Eve were spiritual entities, metaphorical representatives. Adam and Eve were said to be, if you will, the relationship between what we can today refer to as the body and the soul, where in which the body, or that physical form of the Halukah Darabanan, that is what was called, in quote, Eve, taken from, in quote, Adam's side, and that Adam was originally the higher energetic vibrational soul, and that he had no form or soul mate to call his own amongst all the animals of the world. And that's why God put him, in quote, to sleep and created for him Eve. That's a lovely metaphor for how women came about. And some use that as a symbolic metaphor, taking that literally to make women subservient to men. You don't have a greater evil and spiritual crime than trying to make women subservient to men. But, well, that's another topic for another time. But anyway, Adam and Eve then is actually understood as, if you will, higher vibrational, lower vibrational bodies of energy. And the Menachesh, the enchanter, wanted to ensnare the Adamic souls into this physical form, and doing so with the intent to get them trapped here, so that they would therefore, if you will, be pushed aside from performing this work called tikkun, the tilling of the garden. And that is supposedly what the, in quote, two trees in the garden was all about. Remember, it said not supposed to eat of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Never said you couldn't eat of the tree of life. Did you ever think about it? Adam and Eve could have eaten first of the tree of life. They would have lived forever, and then they could have eaten of the tree of knowledge without any type of ramification. It didn't happen. They ate of this tree of knowledge. And the tree of knowledge, especially in Kabbalah, is understood as being the lower vibrational planes of the dimensional energies. That's why it's symbol good and evil, back and forth, right and left, where in which the original Adamic entity or consciousness came from a higher dimensional plane. So its descent into these forms also led to a descent of consciousness into the physicality of construct. In other words, this reality of which we exist in here. The tether which kept the soul's consciousness connected to higher dimensional planes was severed. And that which we call our consciousness or souls became disconnected from its source, leading to the creation of that which we call the unconscious. Those of you might be familiar with the example given by the philosopher Plato in Plato's cave, where which it said that people turned around and all they look at is in the corner of a cave and they see the shadows of reality and they don't turn around to see the greater world. Well, that's supposedly what actually happened in Eden. This is symbolized, I emphasize metaphorical symbol, of the serpent seducing Eve in the Garden of Eden. Well, that symbol, nothing physical to it, no snake ever had sex with a physical woman named Eve and therefore giving birth to Cain. This is all symbolic metaphor. And to understand these things literally is just fundamentally flawed scholarship. But people like to read stories and take them literally. How many of us read novels? How many of us read and love the popular novels, Harry Potter, the Dune series, or whatever other forms of novels? Do you really believe that these are actual literal stories? Do you really believe that in a galaxy far, far away, a long, long time ago, there actually were like real Jedi Knights named Luke Skywalker and Master Yoda? Do you really believe that there's places in northern England today like Hogwarts? You do realize these things are fiction. Please, I hope. Right? Well, what I believe whatever you want. But fiction is fiction. Literature is literature. And biblical literature, written to be symbolic, is not changed to be literal because you choose to believe the literal interpretation of a symbolic story. So therefore, understand now, what we have with the Adam, Eve, serpent is a spiritual metaphor of a descent of consciousness into this physical realm. Has nothing to do with any kind of war of angels, fall of man, or anything of the kind. But what it speaks is the genesis of our human experience here on this earth plane. Remember, we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, given garments of flesh, meaning this is when the Adamic souls in that higher energetic body descended into physical forms that in which we exist today, the physical forms which we believe were always there for millions of years before. But our energetic being, the Halukah Darabanan, descended into them, and that's when we became the composite beings that all Adamic souls are today. And that explains our human reality. So what was it like then beforehand? What were those souls like then? Well, we believe, in spite of the fact that they might have been very spiritually sophisticated, technologically advanced, that they still lacked an element of what we can call consciousness, which disabled them from having that balanced alignment with the higher dimensional planes, which then of course led to their horrible conflicts and their destruction and end of their civilization. That is what we call the fall of the primordial kings. Now, of course, Chaim Vital, the redactor of the Ariel system, interprets this in a very different way than almost everyone else does. And we've already discussed that in our previous classes, so we don't need to be repetitive. But to understand what really happened in the Garden of Eden was the story of the descent of our souls onto earth. And the rest of the Torah is the history of these souls. Now, where are these, in quote, Adamic souls? Answer, they're everywhere. They're all of us, all combined. Every one of us has elements of this Adamic consciousness in the pre-Adamic physical forms. Again, this is the definition and meaning of our good and evil, or Yetzer HaTov, Yetzer Hara. It is, we are composite beings, past and present. And if we understand that within the context of how authentic Genesis is describing these things to us, we understand ourselves a whole lot better. We understand the meaning and purpose of Torah a whole lot better. That everything that we do is meant to evolve, grow, mature spiritually, to reconnect with our higher selves. And here's the zinger. Just because a part of our consciousness got entrapped in this physical form, not all of it did. So there's that higher part of ourselves, which is still in our original dimensional plane and connects to, interacts with that part of us, which is in the physical forms. So that part of us in these physical forms just has to recycle through reincarnation over and over again until we can get the higher consciousness. That's what we call our souls here below. But that part of us, which is our higher selves, which guides us, directs us, is our, in quote, guardian angels and or Magids. Well, we have a different word for them. They're a collective. The higher Adamic souls, we refer to that as Metatron. Metatron, again, is not an entity, but a hive mind. Go on to my YouTube channel, and I speak a lot about the Metatron race, end quote. Those of you who want a source for this material, go into the Sefer Emek HaMelech, Volume 2, Sha'ar HaYetzirah. Go look it up and see what the Rav has to say there. But these are some of the great and important secrets of Genesis. Our connection to a higher reality is within us. We have a purpose in being here on earth, and we will accomplish this. And there's so much, much more to tell, but I've kind of ran out of time for this class. So God be willing, we'll continue our discussions in this in our next class. So again, I want to thank you all for joining me. I'm Ariel Tzadok, your host from KosherTorah School. You find us online at KosherTorah.com. Looking forward to being with you in other classes to come. Thanks for being here. God bless. From here in Paris, good morning. Shalom.